I sell placements on one of my own sites for $250, and I arrived at that number badly. I looked at what other people were charging, picked something in the middle, and called it pricing. It took about a year and a lot of awkward negotiations to work out what actually drives the number, and most of it has nothing to do with the metrics everybody quotes at each other. So here is the seller's side of it, which is worth knowing whether you are buying or selling, because the two are the same conversation viewed from different chairs. What buyers think they are paying for. The pitch is always the same three numbers: a domain authority score, a monthly traffic estimate, and a count of referring domains. All three come from third-party tools, all three are estimates, and all three can be moved by somebody who wants to move them. That last part is the problem. Authority scores are computed from a link graph, which means a site can raise its score by acquiring links, and acquiring links is precisely the business that site is in. So the metric a seller quotes is partly a product of the selling. Traffic estimates are modeled rather than measured. They are directionally useful, and they are frequently wrong by a factor of several in both directions. So a buyer paying by these numbers is paying for a signal that the seller has both the ability and the incentive to inflate. What actually determines the value? Here is my honest list, roughly in order. Whether the site publishes anything a real person would read, not the volume of it. Whether a stranger landing on it would believe a human wrote it for another human. Whether the page your link sits on has any reason to exist beyond hosting your link. A genuine article that would have been written anyway is a completely different asset from a post assembled around 4 client links. How many other outbound links leave the site? I audited my own and found over 15,000 outbound against 16 inbound, which is a ratio that says something unflattering about how much any one of those links is worth. Topical relevance, which people say and rarely mean. A link about proxy infrastructure sitting on a general business blog is worth much less than the same link on something that has covered the subject for years. And whether the site has customers, or a mailing list, or anything that makes it a business rather than a link inventory. That is the thing that is genuinely hard to fake, and it barely appears in any pitch. How I price mine now. The number comes from 3 inputs, and none of them are the authority score. First, what the placement costs me. A placement on my site consumes a bit of my own outbound budget and a bit of my credibility with readers. That is a real cost even though nothing leaves my bank account. Second, what the page is worth to me if I do not sell it. A page ranking for something that brings me customers is not for sale at any sensible price, because renting out a slot on it is worse economics than the customers. Third, what the buyer is actually getting, which comes from that list above rather than from a dashboard. 250 is where those 3 land for me. I have taken less for something well matched to the site's actual subject, and I have declined considerably more for something that would have looked wrong next to the rest of the page. 2 questions that price it faster than any tool. If you only have a minute, ask these. Would this page exist if nobody had paid for it? That separates a publication from an inventory, and it is the single most informative thing you can establish about a seller. And how many links leave this page already? Count them. If yours would be the 7th commercial link on a page of 800 words, you now know what you are buying, and it is not much. Both take under a minute. Neither requires a subscription to anything. I asked them before I look at a single metric now, and they disqualify roughly half of what gets pitched at me. What a placement is actually worth over time. Buyers price a link as though it lasts forever. It does not. Pages get rewritten. Sites get sold. Themes change and the link quietly stops being a link. Somebody runs a cleanup exactly like the one I described earlier, and your placement is collateral. I have no clean figure for how fast that happens across the industry, and anybody quoting you one is guessing. What I can say from my own sites is that a meaningful share of what was placed 3 years ago is gone, and nobody who paid for it ever checked. So a placement is a depreciating asset with no maintenance contract. Price it accordingly, and check your own placements once a year, because that is the only way you will find out. The one protection worth negotiating for is a written note of what was agreed and where, not a legal contract, a line in an email. That is enough to have the conversation later, and without it, you have nothing. What disclosure actually does? Sellers panic about marking a placement as sponsored, so it is worth saying plainly what it changes. It tells search engines not to pass ranking value through the link, which means the buyer got a mention rather than the thing they were paying for. And if they wanted the ranking value, they will be unhappy. It also means the seller has been honest, which has a value that does not appear on any invoice. My position is that a site running a small amount of clearly marked sponsored content at a proper price is a better business than one quietly selling unmarked links at volume. I understand why most people disagree. It is a smaller number in the short run. But the second business has a single point of failure, which is somebody deciding the whole site is a link farm. I have watched that happen to properties worth considerably more than the placements that killed them. The bulk request arrives constantly, and it deserves a straight answer. Somebody wants 10 placements and expects a volume discount, on the logic that 10 of anything is cheaper per unit than 1. That logic holds for manufacturing, and it inverts here. 10 links from one site to one buyer is worth less per link than 1, because the pattern is visible from the outside and each additional one dilutes the last. So the honest per unit price should go up rather than down. And I say that knowing it costs me deals. What I do instead is offer them one placement now and a second in a few months on genuinely different material. That is a worse offer commercially, and it is the one that actually works for them. Why the good sites will not sell? Worth understanding as a buyer, because it explains the whole market. A site with real traffic and real customers makes more from its own business than from renting slots. So the sites most willing to sell are, almost by construction, the ones with the least to lose from selling. That is the central problem with buying placements, and no amount of vetting fully escapes it. The inventory available to you is filtered by willingness, and willingness correlates with exactly the thing you do not want. The exception is a genuine editorial site that takes sponsored content openly, marks it, and limits how much of it runs. Those exist, they charge properly, and they are the only version of this I would recommend without caveats. Editorn Pippin Commandos Editidon. What a seller should refuse. I have a short list and it has cost me money. Anything in a category I would not want associated with the site, regardless of price. That is a judgment call, and it is the whole point of having one. Anchor text written to be exact and unnatural. I will link the brand name or a natural phrase. A buyer insisting on precise commercial wording is telling you what the link is for, and it makes the placement more fragile for both of us. A link into a page that is itself obviously assembled for links, because now the site is a node in something rather than a publisher, and anything with an ongoing obligation attached. A placement is a one-time transaction. A promise to keep something live indefinitely is a liability that outlives the payment by years. And I have watched people forget they made it. The accounting nobody does. This is the operational part, and it is boring, and it matters more than the pricing. Keep a ledger of every placement. The buyer, the date, the page, the destination, where the money moved, and what you promised. I keep mine as a plain file, and I update it the day a deal closes. The reason is that the obligations outlive your memory. I have found links on my own sites pointing at partners whose arrangement ended years ago, still there because removing them was nobody's job. That is free outbound value leaking. And worse, it means I could not have told you what I owed anybody. When you go to clean up your outbound links, that ledger is the difference between a tidy up and breaking an agreement you forgot you had. What to do when somebody quotes you a number? A seller sends you a price list. Now what? Work out the price per thing you actually wanted, rather than per link. If the goal was relevance to your subject, and only one of the 4 sites they offered has ever written about it, then their menu is really one product with 3 distractions attached. Then ask what else they have sold recently in your category. A straight answer tells you the site has some discipline about it. A vague answer tells you the page you land on will have your competitor 2 paragraphs below you, and negotiate on placement rather than on price. A link inside an existing article that already gets read is worth more than a discount on a new post that will get read by nobody. Sellers will usually say yes to that because it costs them less than money. I have paid full price for a good placement and walked away from half price for a bad one. In the same week from the same seller. What I got wrong. The pricing mistake was the obvious one, but it is not the expensive one. The expensive one was selling a placement on the page that was actually working for me. I had a piece that brought in enquiries steadily. Somebody offered a good number for a link in it, and I said yes because the number looked large compared with the effort. What I had done was rent out the most valuable service I owned for a fraction of what it produced on its own, and add an outbound link to the page I most wanted people to stay on. So build the ledger before you build the price list, and mark the pages that are not for sale before anybody asks. Deciding that in the moment, with a number in front of you, is how it goes wrong. More link buying and selling numbers from my own sites at theseodesk.com. Subscribe for SEO that has actually been tested.